I'm going to start off by asking each one of you how you define leadership, and maybe share an epiphany moment when you became self-aware as a leader, either of a strength that you exhibited or perhaps even a challenge that you knew you had to face.
If I was going to kind of say one word about leadership, it's impact. And so the impact that you're trying to drive as a leader could be different depending on who you are, what your company is trying to do, what you value personally and professionally. But at the end of the day, it's how do you bring individuals and groups to their best to drive the impact that you need them to make, right? And sometimes driving an individual to their best can be different than how you drive the group to their best. And you really have to balance that out. I have epiphanies every day, so I try to be a continual learner. But if I was going to say probably the biggest, maybe kind of change over 25 plus years as a professional woman is how do people see you as a leader? So we talk about what you want to drive as a leader. And I was talking to another group of leaders, and I ended up using this word that kind of stuck internally with folks where I said, what's your leadership badge? You have one. Do you actually know what it is? So as much as what you want to describe to other people, what are they saying about you? And so as I think about, I'm much more intentional about my leadership badge. In my 20s, it was, I can work harder than anybody, right? In my 30s, it was, I'm the smartest person. You can ask any question about my business and I'm gonna know it. It changes as you get bigger groups, but it also needs to change as you become more intentional. So for me, my leadership badge is now about, it's kind of this Latin term called cura personalis, which means how do you develop the whole self? And in my mind, it's not just like a kind of soft, fuzzy thing of you want whole people to come to work for you. It actually drives better results. And so I say the big epiphany for me is not just what you want to drive, but how are people receiving that? And how are you being received? And how are they internalizing it? And are you setting the right tone for everybody else in a very intentional way?
That's wonderful, and I think we'll go a little deeper into that in a few minutes. Susan, tell us about your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I couldn't agree more with what both Carrie and Tracy have said. I think those are great perspectives and great advice. I think what I would add to that are a couple of things. One is having a strong sense of your personal values and the values of your institution. It's incredibly important to being a leader. And that's really hard, I think, to get to, understanding your own personal value set and being able to use that value set in literally every interaction that you have professionally. And it's also understanding and making clear what the values of your institution are. So at Valor, we're very clear about the institutional values. They're on our website. They are literally on like posters all over the office, and it's humility, integrity, responsibility to each other, to our clients, to our companies, and excellence. And it's so ingrained in everybody's head, and it's very visible when those kinds of attributes aren't demonstrated. So clarity of value is super important. Sort of the aha moment for me on leadership came around having spent a lot of years thinking that leadership was about me, and I've got to be the one in front, and I have to be the one who's out there getting our message out, or that it was in any way about me. And it has finally sunk into me that it's actually about everybody else. And there's a fantastic Lao Tzu quote, to lead the people, walk behind them. And that's just was an incredibly valuable lesson for me, to always recognize that attention should never be on me, focus should never be on me. Ideas are not always going to be my ideas. And some of that comes with just age and time. But when you're young, you're ambitious, that's sort of the mindset. I'm growing, I'm building. You do think it's about you. And when you ultimately get to a place where you realize it's not, it's actually entirely about my team, it makes an enormous difference from a leadership perspective.
Susan, I want to continue on that thought a little bit, because that feels to me like you are a very inspirational leader. So I want to explore that a little bit about how do you think consciously about inspiring other people, and maybe who's inspired you as kind of your grounding?
Yeah, so in terms of thinking about inspiration, I think about leading by example. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that what I say, do, and how I comport myself influences my team and everybody around me and the companies we work with, our entrepreneurs. So I think about example a lot. In terms of inspiration, personally for me, so my parents are immigrants, came to this country from Egypt in 1961, built great lives for themselves, me, my siblings. I mean, literally had $100 in their pocket and then, worked their butts off. And I think about that all the time. I think about it in the context of when I'm having a tough day, nothing I will do compares to what they did. So that's what inspires me. I always go back to that, and it, again, ties kind of to the values. I always think about values in that context as well.
Carrie, it's a perfect segue to talk about values, because it's so critical to inspiring team. Have your particular values impacted your leadership style and perhaps your career choices?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was interesting to see the convergence this morning of just some of the discussion around values and what matters, right? Very different companies, people with very different backgrounds, and I would kind of put a check mark by, some of the values, right? So doing the right thing, integrity, trust, all of that. There's a really big piece that I think about, and similar to Tracy, I've lived through kind of cycles. So I was in financial services for almost 25 years. And so 2008, the financial crisis, was a true test, right? Leadership is actually easy in good times. True leaders are tested in tough times. And so I think a lot about values, both in terms of what are the values I have, what are the values of the people that I choose to be on my team. Because as you increasingly manage more and more people, the way that you actually impart values, right, which ultimately in my mind becomes the culture of a company, is making very intentional choices about ensuring that there are synthesized values down the line. And somebody told me this story, and it really resonated in terms of thinking about, I'd say kind of the balance of being flexible in how business is changing, as business is changing faster than ever. The competitive world is changing faster than ever. But your values should not be flexible. And there's this old adage of kind of the frog in the pot. Have people heard that? So I think it's actually true. But if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and you turn up the heat slowly, it'll get acclimated to the temperature and it won't jump out. Literally, it won't jump out. It'll die. If you put the frog in the same boiling pot of water, it'll jump out. And it's because it's become used to the relative heat. And so, the message that I would have around values is not only know what they are, expect and inspect them in your team, because when people see who you choose as your team, they're going to assume that you are choosing people who have the values that you want to project. And if they're not, then you should make changes. And then the other part is hold up the mirror and have people who hold up the mirror to you around, are you the frog in the pot? Are you staying true to your values? Like when Susan was talking about, thinking about what our parents did every day, remember what is important to you and don't forget.
So let's explore that a little more, because you said, you want the people around you to share values, and I think that's really important in creating a culture. But it also sometimes creates an environment where you have to make a difficult decision. Mm-hmm. And so as people are developing their careers, how do they assess that moment they need to make a difficult decision, and how do they actually execute on making a difficult decision based on values? And so you mentioned something, you have to be true to yourself. We talk a lot now about authentic leadership. There's a lot of buzz about authentic leadership. And Carrie, you talked a little bit about this. Susan, can you think a little bit with us about how do you show up as the person you want to be? how do you, create your leadership badge? Is it conscious? Is it an evolution?
That's such a good question. It is, I think, it's a lot of its evolution, as I mentioned earlier. My leadership style is very different from what it was for years. So prior to joining Valor, I was an M&A partner at Skadden. I was there for 18 years. And I made partner really young, like I was 32 years old. And I did not lead my teams there the way I would lead them today. Eventually I got there. But as a young partner, I didn't. So there's evolution, and it goes back to values, and it goes back to giving yourself the space to think about what are my values, what kind of person am I? This is about more than, what is my mission? Everybody here works hard. People work for a lot of different reasons, but, we're leaders in our personal lives. What is the mission? What drives me? Why am I here? And that is conscious. That you have to sit there and go back to and start, I start my day with it. I meditate. I don't know if any of you meditate. I do that, and I do start my day thinking about why am I doing this? What are the values? It helps me prioritize actually literally what I'm doing that day. Because when you have a million things to do, if you can prioritize based on, what is my value system, it certainly makes it easier to execute as well.
As Susan was saying that, one thing it brought to mind, I was lucky enough to go to a great business school, and one of my professors did this, I think I was like 22 at the time, is he has to write our obituary. I know that sounds really hard, and it was very hard as a 22-year-old. And so my first round was, hey, Carrie Grace did this, and it was about like becoming senior vice president at 28 or whatever. And then I read it, I'm like, this is the worst ever. Like, this is so, and I crossed it out, right? And then the second one became, everything was wonderful. My career was wonderful. My family was wonderful. Everything was wonderful. And then I came back and said, I don't even know what that means. And then my third attempt was about what mattered. And so then it became, what was the impact that you were going to have, right? And so each of us is going to have a different piece of it. But it just reminded me, whether it's kind of meditating, step back, write it down. What do you want to be known for? Literally, what do you want to be known for? Because it guides you. Because it's easy to get caught up in the unimportant.
I think it's really true that it's the people that are usually important. And Carrie, I'm going to stay with you for a minute, because you lead an enormous group of people. Thousands of people. And as a leader, when people are speaking to you, they want your full attention. How do you manage to stay present? You probably have a million things going on around you. As a leader, how do you remain present in those kinds of conversations in a thoughtful way? And how does that impact your ability to coalesce a team?
So I'm going to give you some tactical things, and then I'll maybe kind of more generalize it. One, I actually have thought about getting Botox, not for cosmetic reasons, but because you just forget that everybody reads everything into if you raise your eyebrow. And they're like, you didn't like what I was saying. And I said, no, I just have a cold and I was itching or something like that. And so it's kind of a reminder that people are looking at you, and they are reading into things, and you're on stage, and whether you kind of want to be on stage all the time or not, you are. And so you have to be cognizant of that. And part of it for me was, my assistant, I think, thinks more highly of me than I think of myself, and so she's scheduled meetings literally from 6 in the morning until like 10 at night with like a 5-minute break in between, and it wasn't lunch, by the way. And I finally just started saying, Jeanette, I actually need 15 minutes of downtime. So because I want to be present for people. This is a really important meeting to them. So I know it's being viewed as just like kind of check the box of like, hey, I need to set up this meeting. People are preparing for this. Before people meet with me, they're working on something for weeks. And I need to be able to have my full attention. And I need to get things beforehand. I literally need to be present for them. So I certainly don't have this one down. That's something that I work on quite a bit. I try to prioritize and focus my time on the things that only I can do. And it's actually very empowering for my leadership team, because it enables them to not be micromanaged. I'm not a micromanager in any sense of the word. And so I'd say there's a big piece about time management in that. And then there's a big piece, I'd say, similar to Susan, is just how do you manage your own personal energy? You have to be really tuned in to how your energy is. I travel, I'm going to London actually on Sunday, so I'm usually abroad at least once a month. Be tuned into where your energy's at. And then however you re-energize yourself, it's very a personal thing. But I'm very focused, I'd say, especially as I get older, much more about that.
That's really interesting. Somebody asked a question earlier of the other panel on how they work in their companies to take care of their employees. How do you take care of yourself with the demanding schedules? Susan, I heard you saying you're leaving here to get on a plane, and all of you travel extensively. How do you take care of yourself?
I mean, I work out. And if I don't work out, it's absolutely evident in my personality and everything else. And I try to be really disciplined about how I eat. I mean, just making sure I feel good is really how I do it. One thing I want to add to what Tracy was saying, and the question earlier about how are you present for people. So it's so hard, right, for everybody because we're so distracted all the time, and it's really societal. But what I've taken to doing is letting people know when I'm not present. You know, I will say to somebody, could you hold on one second because I'm not paying attention to you. And then I'll do whatever I have to do and clear whatever that was and then come back to it. And I think actually it has surprised a lot of people on my team because they're not used to hearing that from anybody. But it's surprisingly effective, and I feel better about it because I haven't completely blown off, 15 minutes that somebody has prepared for to come spend time with me on a particular topic.
So I think it's clear of the four of us that I'm the one who workout is not a drug for me, but it should be. I do try, I've actually started to do yoga and stuff like that. I'm kind of past my running days, but yes, I actually don't like the word balance. This is energizing to me. Doing things like this is incredibly energizing. I get a tremendous amount of energy from helping people and being around people and being, people helped me. People still help me on an hourly basis. So I think a lot about just, things that really bring energy to me. The big thing that I think about, I have two kids, a 16 and a 13-year-old. And I will say, probably different than Tracy, I don't think we're there in terms of it being okay, especially for women to kind of get up and say, I'm going to XYZ. I do still think there's a differential that we collectively have to work on about making it okay. Do I try to set the right message? Absolutely. Am I like the most balanced person? No, not on any given day I'm not. I try to be overall. I think my kids would say they like me at least, or love me on a daily basis. But I think we need to make it better. And I think, Madeleine Albright had a quote that said, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I'm a big believer in helping other women. I'm a big believer in helping people. I'm a big believer in helping other women. So I say, number one is this for me is really energizing. The other part, if I was going to kind of go back to my 25-year-old self and say, seriously, don't do this, right? Because there's along the list of things you say, like, don't do this. Don't worry about things. It's so easy to say, it is so hard to do. Don't worry about things. It's going to work out. It may not work out the way you thought it was going to work out, but it's going to work out. And if I think about how you spend time and what saps energy, it's worrying about things. That is a quality of time thing that probably has made the biggest difference for me, in that I really do let things go. If I've had a really bad day, I go to sleep that night, and I usually forget like 90% of what was bad, maybe 99%. But let it go.
So in some ways you want to let go, but in other ways you want to focus. And at some point, you each made a decision to pursue P&L responsibility. So I want to talk about the importance of that decision and what that meant to your career a little bit. So shall we? Carrie, you're looking very excited and you look energized. So I'm gonna start with. I love the energy. Let's
drank
start
my coffee. Okay, so I have had the real privilege and benefit of running very big, what I'll call kind of staff or support functions, and also big P&Ls. So what was interesting for me, probably late 20s, kind of early 30s, I was running a very, very big organization, support organization, right? So all around kind of clients, client support, marketing, all that. I had a really big seat at a really big leadership table. And for me, I knew that I didn't want to become, kind of that person, sitting on the big leadership board at Bank of America in terms of running that function. I really kind of wanted a more diverse set of experiences. I knew I had to go run a P&L. And so first I'd say I let people know that I wanted to do it. People cannot read your mind. You need to let them know you have an interest, and you can't expect it to then happen like 3 months later. You need to kind of signal in performance planning and any of your reviews about what you really would love to do. Second, they need to understand why you're a good candidate for it. What experiences have you done that are going to lead to them entrusting you with a really big kind of P&L? And I'd say the third thing, and this is where I see a lot of women that I mentor, men actually too, sometimes you have to take a step down to take a step forward. And so people looked at me and they were just like, Carrie, I can't believe that you just did that. You had a seat at this huge table, you had a voice at this table, and you basically are working for a direct report of the person who is at the table with you. And I shook my head, I said, yes. And by the way, it wasn't easy every day. It wasn't easy not being in the flow of information every day and knowing what was going on up here. But it was probably one of the best decisions that I made. So I'd say be intentional, let people know, make a plan, help others help you, and enable yourself to be helped. You do not have to do it alone. Who are the people who are going to help you? It was probably one of the best things that I did. And I think that sometimes if you wait too long, it becomes hard then to make that move. If you've moved so far up in a certain function, if that's not kind of what you really want your career path to be, you just have to be intentional about when you do it and not kind of get lulled into not doing it sooner rather than later.
We're going to take questions in a minute, but Susan, I want to come back to this concept of being a little bit uncomfortable and taking a risk and creating change in your own career path. You've made changes in your career. How did you assess the risk? What was your decision process like, and where did you find the discomfort?
Yeah,
How did you get past it?
As I was listening to Tracy answer this question, I mean, she used exactly the right word, which is uncomfortable. I mean, buckle your seatbelts and get ready to be uncomfortable, because that's how you grow. So for me, as I mentioned earlier, I had been at Skadden right out of law school for 18 years and had been a partner for 12. And somewhere along the way, then be the last 5, so I didn't expect to make partner. When I made partner, I said, okay, I'll do this for 5 years, see how this goes. 10 years later, I'm still doing it. Kate knows this. And thinking about wanting to be more challenged. Always thinking about that. Always thinking about wanting to build a business, not just build my own practice or continue to build the firm. And it took a lot of soul searching, measured in years, to figure out, one, what I wanted to do and how I would get there. And I would say a couple of things. One is take that time to actually figure it out, understand what it is you are trying to achieve, how your skill sets match up with that, and let people know. These are all things Carrie and Tracy have said. And then in terms of the discomfort, that is how you grow, and embrace the discomfort. And if you're not uncomfortable, I know lots of people say this, but it's so true. If you're not uncomfortable, you are not growing. I mean, you're stagnant. And I think I'm wildly happy having put myself in a position where I'm incredibly uncomfortable, like every minute of the day.
I want to ask you something that's a tough question for a lot of people in thinking about their performance reviews and their compensation conversations. And what you just said made me think that assessing where you are, assessing the value that you bring is a big part of that conversation. Can we just explore that kind of very quickly for a minute before we open up for questions? How do you prepare for a performance review? How do you prepare for a compensation conversation? Or help others to do it.
Yeah, so interestingly, I'll tell you from my perspective, when I had to do that as a partner, you every year would make your case for your unit level. And how do you prepare? I mean, you always think, you prepare for it every day in what terms of what you bring to the table. I mean, that's part of being part of any organization. If you're not getting up every day and contributing, I mean, then there is nothing to say at the end of the day. And I never thought about my job in terms of the comp. And so I didn't really prepare, what is my pitch? I just did every day. I mean, I just did my work every day and built. And that's sort of hard to practically take anything away from that. I guess I would say practically, if I thought I was missing a skill set or had not addressed part of the business that I know was valued in my institution, I certainly made sure I did it. Now, when I'm talking to people about comp now, which I am in the middle of doing, I have changed the way I look at it so that it's more than just the delivery of the, XYZ performance. Everybody knows what that might be in a private equity firm. It's also the values piece. So do you reflect that? Are you building the team? And so I think you can't forget those things when you are assessing your value to the institution.
Yeah, that's great advice.
I completely agree with what's been said. Since part of our company does this for a living, we're actually very, very good at kind of doing performance management as a process. So here's what I'd say, both about kind of performance management and compensation. Performance management. When you're going through, you're going to get an assessment of your performance. As you're giving your own assessment about the performance, don't over-rotate on the weaknesses. We have a tendency across the board in performance management to really kind of focus on, here's the things that you need to change. All of us have things we need to change, always. Focus on the things when you're talking about your performance, and actually I'd say even just kind of like in general what you want to do as a whether you're an individual contributor or leader, what are your strengths? Spend as much time on honing in and doubling down on your strengths, maybe even a little bit more time than your weaknesses. Don't become the person that's kind of like, hey, I'm the best kind of mortgage person, and you have a perception that's not actually valid. But I would say, and I probably on the margin see this a little bit more with women than men. They tend to be a little bit more of, here's the 10 things that I did wrong, and here's the things that that I'm going to kind of fix. And I'm like, you're correct, but what are the things that you did really well? And be balanced. So I would say be very balanced in your performance discussion, regardless of kind of what year you had. From a compensation standpoint, I am similar, huge believer in not kind of saying like, as the conversation's happening, gosh, I was really expecting X, Y, Z, and even though I know you've been working on this for 2 months, I'm going to tell you what my disappointment is, right? You're setting nobody up for a good outcome. Probably, I think the biggest thing that you should be doing for yourself is know what your value is. Do you actually know what you are worth? And I don't mean that in terms of like whether you're changing company or not. I happen to be a very kind of company-centric person. I'm very loyal. I love working at Aon. But what I would say to all of you is, do you actually know what you're worth? You can make conscious decisions from that, but I would say really go out and just keep a tab on the market. And not because you might want to move, because sometimes you have overinflated views of what you're worth. I find people who have that, and I find people who have underinflated views of what they're worth. And you should just know what that is. And then you should figure out, what do you want to do about it? There might become a point when you say, hey, I think I'm so out of the market that I might want to consider a change. There might be times when you say, I feel like I'm out of the market, I want to have a conversation. Whatever you choose to do, I would just be intentional about it, but I would start from a fact base. Okay. Here, I'm going to leave you just kind of with one thought too. There's so much discussion, right? I think this week there was, I can't remember what it was called, but National Women's Pay Day or something like that along this topic. You can make a difference. Leave today and make a difference. When I first joined in every group that I do, I go across the board, not just for women and men, and say who is undervalued. I actually go and proactively change their comp. I have fundamentally changed some unbelievable female leaders' comps. They didn't ask me for it. One of them, that actually changed it quite a bit, she would have never asked for it. I went and benchmarked it. They had no idea I was doing this. Go and change it. If you want to change the world, change the world. Like, I don't know who we're waiting for. So what I would just say is the power of the collective group in here is really, really big. Don't wait for people to come and ask, go and do.